The following program was produced by the Theosophical Society in America.
My dear friends, sincerely, what a joy it is for me as a Muslim to be here in what in Islam is called a circle of love. The exact verse is, "Oh, please come out of the circle of time and enter the circle of love." You know, I'm here to talk about Islam, but really it's more about Islamophobia or Islamotrauma. And following what Brother Ed Tick said, certainly you as non-Muslims, as US citizens in America, you are suffering from a trauma of Islamic terrorism. You are wounded. And I would like you to believe that Muslims also, when they are suspected always of being terrorists or at the very least violent people, are also suffering from a wound. So we're fairly consistent in that area. You know, it's very important that if we want to heal this, we have some models. And the best model I can think of is someone from my part of the world. I'm from Bangladesh, from South Asia. And you know about Mahatma Gandhi, who knew a lot about what is required to create peace, harmony, amity, in societies that are multi-religious, multicultural. He'd always make 3 points. Number one, he would say, it is the sacred duty of every individual to have an appreciative understanding of other faiths in that community. Not just a nice idea, it is a sacred duty. And to have an appreciative understanding. I don't know if you know, in America, the second largest religion in this country is Islam, the group of people. And there are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. You can't get away from them. Nor they from you. And it's not enough to say, I'm a theosophist. Or Jamal says, as Edie so kindly said, or David so kindly said, I'm a good person. I am non-prejudiced. I'm open-minded. Gandhi would say, what are you non-prejudiced about? What are you open-minded about? You must know something which is an appreciative understanding of the other faith. That's point number one. Point number two Gandhi made was that he said, let's accept that every single religion has truths and untruths. And he would add with a wink, especially your own. Third point. He would say, if someone commits a wrong, let's say a religious extremist commits violence, he would say, I beg you, please do not criticize this person's religion. Better point out to this person verses and insights of beauty and wisdom from this person's own religion. Help this person to become a better Muslim, a better Christian, a better Jew, a better Hindu. That is the way to peace. So, in the short time I had, I'm so glad I have a clock, you know, my wristwatch, because I don't see a clock up there. I'm from the East. I normally talk till somebody snores. But I know I've got to stop. But I'll be disciplined. I've got to watch here. So, let me, if you don't mind, because it's so important to give you the basics about Islam. You know, there was a op-ed a few months ago in the New York Times where this reporter went to all the important agencies in Washington, D.C. All those who fight counter terrorism or terrorism, the FBI, CIA, the House, the Senate, the top people, including senators and head of FBI and CIA, ask them one question saying, sir, you say, or madam, you say that we must know our enemy in Iraq. Tell me, what's the difference between a Sunni and a Shia? And do you know 99% had no idea. This is very, very frightening in terms of the level of awareness. So basic facts. Islam is a 7th century religion. I did say 1.6 billion people in the world. The largest group of Muslims is in South Asia. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, it comprises 40% of the world's Muslims. If you add to that Southeast Asia, that's 60%. The Arab world is not more than 12 to 15% of the entire Muslim world. A Muslim or Muslim is simply one who follows the faith of Islam. It's not a denomination. What are the two main denominations? Sunni and Shia. 85% of the world's Muslims are Sunni. 15% are Shia. And you would know in which countries do you have the majority Shia in the Muslim countries. It's Iraq and Iran, and also actually you would know this, Bahrain. The largest Shia majority. What's the difference between a Sunni and a Shia? You know, when Prophet Muhammad died in 632 AD or CE, the question arose, who would succeed him? Not as a prophet, you cannot replace a prophet, but as a community leader, because by that time, the tribes were becoming integrated, it was becoming consolidated. One group said, let's choose the leader on the basis of democratic vote. Another group said, it's a good idea, but really it should be by blood lineage. The group that said blood lineage, that's Shia. That's the 15% of Muslims in the world. The group that said by consensus, by democratic vote, that was Sunni. So it's just based on a historical incident. And we don't have anymore the continuation of those khalifas or those political leaders who represented all of Islam. But as it happens, it has led to very absurd theological disputations. For example, you know, a Sunni, when he prays or she prays, goes like this and like that. A Shia goes like this and like that. But just on that, there are disputations. I know that you understand this. You know, there's a common story in all the Abrahamic faiths. God came down and revealed certain basic truths to some people. But then the devil came and said, let me organize that for you. And that became religion. So what is it I really would like you to know about Islam scripturally? It doesn't mean that Muslims are following that. It doesn't mean that non-Muslims are following that. You know, I went to a recent retreat in Santa Fe. It was a Christian retreat. I was a token Muslim there. And I met this wonderful friend, Roger Kamenetz, who's a Jewish writer, The Jew in the Lotus. It's a bestseller. He's written many, many books. He knows a lot about Islam. When I told him this one verse from the Qur'an, he said, Jamal, I'm a writer. I'm going to really start writing about this. And I want this to be on the billboard in every part of America. So what does this verse say from the Qur'an? The verse says, from the Qur'an, it says, we believe in God and what has been revealed to us. We believe in Abraham and what has been revealed to Ismail, Isaac, and to Jacob, and to Jacob's tribes. We believe in all that has been revealed to Moses and that which has been revealed to Jesus. We believe in all the prophets and we make no distinctions between them. This is repeated, this sentiment, this idea, this core essence in the Quran again and again. It always has a shadow side. That's the human nature interpreting that. What is the shadow side? To the untamed ego of a Muslim, he or she will say, yes, but that which was revealed to the others at that time became corrupted or politicized. Therefore, this is the pure, pristine truth. That's the shadow side of that. The Quran is very, very interfaith friendly. All writers, academicians agree on that, in theory. Couple of verses from the Quran. The Quran says, if Allah wanted, Allah could have made all of you one single community. But Allah chose to give you different languages, different colors, different prophets, different books, made you into nations and tribes, men and women, all for one reason, that you might get to know one another. That's a phrase used by Muslims today again and again. Let's really get to know one another. Shadow side? There are also awkward verses that refer to a specific incident, a historical event. For example, there's a verse in the Quran which says, take not the Jews or Christians as your protectors or friends, because they are protectors and friends of each other. Now what the extremists do, literalists do, they take that as a universal message. This particular verse came at a time when there was one particular battle going on, where there was a contract between Jews and Christians with the Muslims, and the Muslims claim that the Jews and Christians, they reneged on that particular treaty, on that contract. So it refers to that particular incident. And the proof is, if you go down just a few more verses below, a verse of the Quran, same chapter, same page, it says, it doesn't matter if you are a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or a Sabian. What takes you to heaven is having faith in God and especially doing righteous deeds. It is righteous deeds that takes you to heaven. And this sentiment is repeated again and again in the Quran. In the Quran, all the prophets, Jewish prophets, are highly honored. Abraham, of course, is called, much to the sometimes annoyance of my rabbi friends, he's called the first Muslim. The Quran says Abraham was not a Jew, was not a Christian, he was the first Muslim. Muslim in the sense of someone just being submitted to God. That's the literal meaning of Muslim. Moses is called the voice of God, Kalimullah. Mary has a whole chapter in the Quran. There's far more in the Quran about Mary than all the Christian scriptures put together. And Jesus in the Quran is called Ruh Allah, Spirit of God. In fact, Jesus in the Quran is highly revered, even though the Quran says, make no distinctions between the prophets. But Jesus is very special. In what sense? For example, in many ways, but I'll give you one example. You know, in Islam, there is no original sin. The Quran says every single human being is fitra, which means primordially, originally, very good, very, very good, which led Rumi, by the way, to go into a trance, and he exclaimed, you are a ruby in the midst of granite. How long will you continue to deceive us? For we can see the look in your eyes. So please return to the root of your real self. So everybody is fitra. However, out of an intelligent design, the Quran says, divine design, God placed in every single human heart what is called the slinking whisperer. So we can build our spiritual muscles. Of course, God guides you. But Prophet Muhammad said, there are two people in whom there never was a slinking whisperer. Who are they? And Muhammad said, Mary and Jesus. And they were quite surprised. And they said, what about you, Muhammad? You have it in you too? He said, yes, of course I have the slinking whisper in my heart, but don't worry. I made the devil inside me a Muslim. Simply means being submitted to God. So what is the greatest wound of a Muslim? It's not so much that he or she is always suspected of being violent or being called a terrorist. The greatest wound of a Muslim is simply this, that an average Muslim has such sincere, heartfelt love and regard for Jesus, for Abraham, for Moses, all those prophets, and yet their Christian counterparts, for example, will say, Muhammad is a child molester, a sex maniac. The usual image of Muhammad is a man with a sword in one hand and a whole train of wives behind him. This wounds a Muslim very, very deeply because they realize that non-Muslims know so little about the life of Prophet Muhammad, whereas every Muslim is so intimately aware of every detail of Prophet Muhammad's life. Give this one instance about so many wives, being a sex maniac. The truth is, the reality is, Prophet Muhammad in his time, 7th century, was married for 25 years to one woman till she died, Khadija. And she was 15 years his senior. Also his employer, radical by any age actually. And when she died, he did marry in the 10 years he had left, 7 or 8 wives. But who were they? They were all slaves, widows, or divorcees. In that society, in that time, considered utter discards. His message was, if I, as a prophet, I am marrying them, you must marry them too. The only one who was not in that category was Aisha. And who was she? She was the daughter of his very best friend, Abu Bakr, who used to insist, if you love me so much, if you really say you're my best friend, marry my daughter. But she's so young, don't worry, she'll grow. And he married her at the age of 14, and she's a renowned figure in Islam. Also for you to know, and I tell this to Muslims also, that the reality is, Prophet Muhammad, he married 2 women who were Jewish. He married a Christian lady also. And to each of them he said, don't change your religion, because you are people of the book. That's what the Qur'an says. And see, the Islamic scholars, they note, the Qur'an says it in the singular, people of the book, indicating the Qur'an is like 1/3 installment of the same book. So this is the reality. Also, most non-Muslims have no idea about the truth that every Muslim knows, that Muhammad was such a profound mystic. You have no idea how many years of his life he spent in meditation before he got the first revelation. He was born in an age called Jahiliyyah, which means savagery and ignorance. And he was so despairing of the recklessness, the lawlessness, and especially the treatment of women, because women were his greatest followers, that many people say he was clinically depressed. And he'd go in the mountains for long periods just to meditate, and become very still and silent. And after many, many years of meditation regularly, at the age of 40, he had this incredible epiphany called the Night of Power. What was that about? Well, he was simply in the cave in Mecca, just meditating, and suddenly he saw this huge light approaching him, and he felt deathly scared. He was shaking, mortified, perspiring. This light came closer and closer and said, "I'm Angel Gabriel." And he thought for sure he was going mad. And the light said, "Iqra." Iqra means recite, recite. And he was befuddled, bewildered, petrified. All he could mutter was, "But I'm illiterate." And he ran down the mountain into the arms of his wife, Khadija. Long story, she sent him back. She persuaded him. Once again, the light. Once again, Iqra. But this time he felt some pain inside of him, and just from the depths of his being, from the innermost recesses of his soul, came out these words of astonishing beauty and wisdom that was seared into his soul. And he ran down the mountain, told his wife and relatives and friends, and this happened intermittently for 23 years. Quite often unpredictably, and sometimes in answer to questions. He would go into a trance and receive that voice. And the collection of that is called Qur'an, which you have heard about. And Qur'an literally means recitation. So the Qur'an is meant to be heard. It's a sonoral revelation. A large part of the beauty of the Qur'an is, besides its wisdom, is in the rhythm, the cadence, and the melody of the words. Let me recite to you a Quranic prayer. This is the equivalent of the Lord's Prayer in Christianity, called Surah Fatiha. You listen with your inner ear. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم الصراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. And traditionally we all say Ameen, so please join me. Ameen. The second epiphany I want to tell you about Prophet Muhammad, which every Muslim knows, is called the night journey. Once again, Prophet Muhammad was meditating, and to his utter astonishment, and he was confused. Is this a dream or is it really happening? He found his entire being becoming transported horizontally from Mecca to Jerusalem. And from there, with Angel Gabriel, he began to ascend 7 levels of heaven, from which comes his cliche, I am in 7th heaven, going up all the way. And it has many symbolisms, many meanings, as has the Night of Power. But one important result of this journey was he saw around him angels going like this, bending, standing up and prostrating. And all they were saying was, "Oh God, you're the greatest of the greatest, the most compassionate of the compassionate. Thank you, thank you, thank you." So he got the message that a human prayer must consist essentially of praising God and thanking God, and using the gift of a human body to express this adoration. You've seen Muslims pray, they prostrate. That's why the saying is, one prostration of prayer to God frees you, liberates you from 1,000 prostrations to your ego. That's the purpose of a prayer. Let us move on to now some very used and misused words these days. Unbeliever, infidel. You've heard those words again and again. The reason I want to talk to you about that is because the assumption is made that, and this is actually, this impression is given by Muslims and non-Muslims, that infidel refers to someone who is not a Muslim. And that's not the truth. Infidel comes from the root word kafir or kufr, which simply means one who is ungrateful, Muslim or non-Muslim. So in the Quran, the harshest words used for infidels are for those who persecuted Jesus. Harshest words. They're the greatest infidels. Those who opposed Abraham, Moses, they are infidels. So that is a misconstruction, thinking that infidel is one who is not a Muslim, can be anybody. And by the way, this idea of gratitude is very strong in Islam, as it is in other religions. You know, I'm from Bangladesh, a very small country land-wise, half the size of Oregon. Oregon has about 4 or 5 million people. We have 150 million people. It's really packed. And plus, as you know, every year we are visited by all kinds of natural disasters. You know that. 8 years ago, Oxford, Cambridge did a worldwide tour. In which part of the world are people the happiest? Lo and behold, Bangladesh. Why? They said because they found out these people are so grateful. They've learned the art and the meaning of gratitude. Let me tell you, a Mullah Nasruddin story. That's the teaching story in Islam. The mullah has lost his donkey. In that part of the world, it's a very big deal. The entire village tries to find his donkey. They cannot find his donkey. They come back in the evening to give mullah the bad news. And where's the mullah? He's in the town square, on his knees, saying, Allah, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful. And the puzzled townsfolk say, Mullah, maybe you don't understand. Your donkey is lost forever. He says, I know, but I'm so grateful. Imagine what could have happened to me if I was on the donkey. Many levels of meaning. Even in times of affliction, if you're giving thanks, gratitude, you're giving thanks for unknown blessings already on their way. Let me go on to the second part, besides infidel. You've heard the word jihad. Now, it's so sad that for you, the word jihad evokes fear. But for me, because of my background, my training, my understanding of this word, my connection to the word jihad, I feel a sense of sacredness and beauty when the word jihad is mentioned. Totally different worldviews. What does jihad literally mean? Jihad literally means effort, exertion. It is primarily used, this exertion, this effort, to become what the Qur'an calls a better human being. In Islamic mysticism, it's called insan-e-kamil, the perfected human being. And what does that involve? The Qur'an is very specific about it. It involves what the Qur'an says, transforming your nafs. What is nafs? Nafs is your little ego. You have to transform your nafs, no matter who you are. That's a given. And the Qur'an says when you begin the process of making this effort to transform your nafs, there comes a cry from within you. And the words in the Qur'an are, the cry from within you says, open for me my heart. And that requires a lot of effort too, to open the heart. That's why in Islamic spirituality, you'll find the symbolism is usually a heart with wings. The real work is to open up the heart. And only when you do that are you able to be of authentic service. What Rumi calls, you can become a lamp, a lifeboat, or a ladder when you make this effort. So this effort in really gathering the scattered fragments of your ego, as the mystics say, so the royal stamp can be pressed on it, that's jihad. The effort to open your heart, that's jihad. Let me tell you a mullah story again of this vigilance that's required, the jihad that's required. The mullah goes to work, opens his lunch pail box. What does he find? A cheese sandwich. Second day, third day, fourth day, always a lousy cheese sandwich. On the 10th day, he says, I'm getting sick and tired of this lousy cheese sandwich. So his co-worker said, Mullah, why don't you ask your wife to make you another kind of sandwich? You can be firm with her. I'm not married. Who makes them? I do. Story of our lives. It requires that jihad, that vigilance, that effort to become aware and break the pattern. This is, in Islam, it's called the inconvenient work. we always try to avoid. Transforming the ego and opening up the heart. And in opening up the heart, we could do seminars after seminars in Islamic spiritual techniques of opening up the heart. Let me say what Rumi says. Rumi says, Jamal, take a pickaxe and break open your stony heart. The heart's matrix is glutted with rubies. Springs of laughter are buried in your chest. So you have to open up your heart. There's a direct revelation from God to Prophet Muhammad where God says, O beloved one, I cannot be contained in the space of the earth. I cannot be contained in the space of the heavens, but I can be contained in the space of the pure, loving heart of my servant. Quran says Allah is Zahir and Batin, outside of you and also inside of you. Mystics say, if you say God is only inside of me, the whole universe hangs its head in shame. If you say it's only outside, you're not telling the truth. And this is the real work which is called the inconvenient work. Let me tell you a true story of this very beloved female saint in Islam named Rabia, 8th, 9th century. And another very famous mystical saint named Hassan of Basra, very much in love with her because she was so beautiful. And she always refused to marry because she said, I'm already married to God. So one day they're sitting by this wonderful tree and there's a lake there and there's a walled compound, and Hassan of Basra is so eager to impress her. It becomes 12 o'clock, time for prayer. So he takes his prayer rug and he puts it on the lake and he gets on it. He floats on it. And he tells her, Rabia, please join me in prayer. Thinking this will really impress her. She takes her prayer rug, he steps on it, and she levitates, she goes higher than him. And says, Hassan, please join me. Isn't this what you want? Now that I'm much higher than you, I'm above the walled compound, everybody can see us and they'll marvel at our powers. Hassan, what you did, a fish can do. What I did, a moth can do. But you're forgetting what the Quran says, to do the real work. Transforming your nafs and opening up your heart and being of authentic service. That is the real work. You know, Rumi says it's like a benevolent king has sent you to a far away country with one specific task in mind. You go to this far away country, you do so many wonderful things, but not that one specific task. Upon your return, can you say you have attained, accomplished? No. So this is very clear in the Quran, if truly we listen to it. So that's one part of jihad, the main part of jihad. The other part of jihad is to work for justice, to make an effort to work for justice. The Quran says, be just. This is closest to God consciousness. You have to be just. In fact, the Quran, like other holy books, has very strict injunctions. Be witnesses to truth. Even if you are against yourself, your relatives, or your parents. The last part of jihad, I would say less than 10%, is about defending yourself when you are attacked. The exact verse of the Quran is, fight in the way of God those who fight you, but begin not hostilities. God loves not the aggressors. This is very clearly laid out. Now many will say, but jihad means holy war. This is the impression given by media, by educated people. The truth is, I want to tell you unambiguously, I don't know the exact English word, unequivocally, the word holy war does not exist in the Quran. Just as the word 72 virgins, you've heard that many times. Believe me, I have looked. It does not exist in the Quran. Yes, it is an extra Quranic sources because you see, we forget one particular point I should mention to you. Ever since 7th century, For 1,000 years, Islam was a predominant religion. It's very hard for you to understand that today. I repeat, since the 7th century, for 1,000 years, Islam was a predominant religion. In that 1,000 years, there was a lot of contentious debate among the jurists and sages. It was warmly welcomed. People were delighted, having diametrically opposite views. They're the people who brought up these contentious ideas and concepts. But in that 1,000 years, let me tell you, if you were to ask who has the largest geographical empire, Islamic empire, largest economic power, Islamic empire, largest military machine, Islamic empire, and what Muslims like to believe, a most beautiful flowering of arts and literature, especially sciences. But after 1,000 years, last 3-4 centuries, very sharp decline in the political and economic base of Islam. Today, if you ask, in which part of the world are people the poorest of the poor, Islamic world, the most illiterate, the most economically deprived, the most politically deprived by their own people, oppressed by their own governments, Islamic world. What happened? Many, many theories, but everybody agrees at the root of it is simply this. The answer lies in just the way I said it. How did I say it? We were number one, number one, number one, number one. This very quickly produces an astonishing energy of arrogance and ignorance in the rulers. And very quickly there's a decline. And that's what happened to Islam. So today, if anybody tells me individually or collectively, I am number one or we are number one, I really get quite worried, actually. Okay, let me move on then to the third most misunderstood part, the status of women in Islam. For sure, I would say the biggest problem we have in the Islamic world today is about restoring the rights, the rightful voices of women in Islam. Do women have a second-class position? I would say sometimes a third-class position, actually. This is very paradoxical. Why? Because everyone agrees, without any dispute, that the world's most radical feminist was actually Prophet Muhammad. And the Qur'an as a holy book, compared to all the other holy books, gives the greatest rights and privileges to women. Not perfect, but I'm saying on a relative basis. So why is it that the situation is so difficult today? Let me give you an example of what's happening actually. In America, you know, for the last 2-3 years, women individually have been going to the mosque. Anybody been to a mosque here? A Muslim, a mosque? Great. Where are the women? Always in the back. Always relegated to a hidden, concealed place. Never in the main sanctuary. Well, these courageous women, they've gone and plunked themselves on the sanctuary of the mosque. So here come the men and say, "Sister, what are you doing? What are you doing here?" She says, "I'm praying." She says, "You can't be here because if you're here, we can't pray." She says, "Why not?" They say, "Because you're here." Then she says, "That's your problem. You can pray. Why can't you pray?" Well, it's against the Islamic tradition. So now comes her turn. She says, "Show me." Where did it say? Any place. They say, "Well, no, it's against the Islamic tradition." So she says, "Now listen to me," and she has documents. In the 7th century, at the time of Prophet Muhammad, when he had his mosque adjacent to his house, women and men prayed alongside. One side men, one side women. Women sometimes led prayers. Women did the call to prayer. So why can't I be here? Oh, it's against the Islamic tradition. But see, don't forget, men have begun to hear this now. Wow. Where does it say in the Quran? But my point to you is, it has become a part of the Islamic tradition by medieval consensus. And why did it happen that way? The main reason is this, most academicians agree. that when Prophet Muhammad gave such, quote unquote, astonishing rights to women in the 7th century, the men were so enraged. The men were so furious, but because he was a prophet, they couldn't do anything. But when he died, they took charge and they began to interpret the verses to the advantage of men. All those verses in the Quran, which were to the advantage of women, they turned to the advantage of men. Let me tell you the worst one. The worst one. When Prophet Muhammad gave so many rights to women and the men were so angered, many men would come to the Prophet and say, but you know, this lady who is married, I've seen her having an affair with my neighbor there. She's guilty of adultery. And this happened so often that Prophet Muhammad, he went into a trance. He asked this question, what shall I do? And a revelation came and said, if these men come and complain about the adultery of those women, they must produce 4 reliable witnesses who saw the physical act. Impossible, really. Well, when Prophet Muhammad died, and when a woman came and complained about, I have been raped, these men began to say, by extension of that verse, that's their interpretation of the Sharia, do you have 4 reliable witnesses who saw the physical act? Well, of course not. But see, it doesn't stop there. They extended even more to say, because you have not been able to produce 4 reliable witnesses who saw the physical act, you are obviously guilty of promiscuity, and you must be punished. That's the most egregious abuse of a verse which was meant to the advantage of women. So only now in the Islamic world do we have women who are scholars. This is the beautiful aspect of it. And they're saying, we're going to fight for justice, not on the basis of equity, but on the basis of scriptures. And they're making tremendous headway. They're saying, this is what the Quran says. And I give you many, many other instances how it has been abused. But you must know, in the Islamic world as a whole, everybody agrees women are on the move. If we take just one tiny segment and look at higher education, you'll be startled to know in all the institutions of higher learning, there's a larger number of women than men. Sometimes as high as 80% women to men. So you can imagine in the next 10, 15, 20 years, the whole world is going to change. In fact, a lot of women who are familiar with the women's rights and the liberation movement say the women's liberation rights is really going to come from the Islamic world because of what is happening. So my friends, what do we do? What can we do? What can I do? What can you do in this climate, difficult climate? And how can I describe to you this difficult climate? The Quran says it very beautifully. The Quran says when there is chronic misunderstanding, chronic anger, chronic distrust, chronic helplessness, chronic fear, the Quran says it's not that the eyes become blind, the hearts become blind. I repeat to you, it's not that the eyes become blind, the hearts become blind. And the Quran suggests when the hearts become blind, force is never going to work. Reason can only go so far. And here's the answer. Only that which comes from the heart can open another heart. This is our biggest challenge, and this is our biggest opportunity. So, in this very short time I have, just a few minutes, because I want you to ask me questions. What does Islamic spirituality or the Quran have to offer in this area? In theory, because again, you might say Muslims are not doing that. That's not the point. The Quran suggests that the most important provision for our journey, called life, no matter what your religion, is compassion. Prophet Muhammad said, all that is in the holy books throughout the ages is in the Quran. All that is in the Quran is in Surah Fatiha. That's the one I recited. That's the first chapter. All that is in the Surah Fatiha is in the Basmallah. Basmallah is a formula which says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. It means in the name of Allah, boundlessly compassionate, boundlessly merciful. The Quran suggests if only we understood the fabric of compassion. God is compassion. Creation is compassion. Our greatest provision, greatest practice, our greatest insight is understanding compassion and developing it. It's not only Islam, all the other traditions, but the Quran is emphasized 200 times in the Quran. And the metaphor is water. You know, on Friday, John talked about the tsunami. There are many verses which, from different traditions. There's nothing as soft and yielding as water is, and yet for overcoming the hardest, there's nothing as powerful as water is. So if water is the metaphor for compassion, compassion is authentic strength, raw strength. The Quran goes on further, says, not only is it raw strength, there's a verse in the Quran which says, and the earth was parched. And God sent down these merciful waters, and the earth was clothed in green, meaning compassion is also life-giving. Now, the greatest secret, the Quran suggests, is can you, and you know this, cultivate compassion for yourself. That's the key. If you really want peace within yourself, in your family, in your community, in your nation, globally, the secret is, can you cultivate compassion, mercy, gentleness for yourself? And we need that. If you want to transform the ego is very wily. If you use force, it won't work. If you want reason, it has a better reason, more logic. It only melts in the face of compassion. The heart, the Quran suggests, your pain, your sadness, your anger, your bitterness, please receive this with compassion for yourself. Allow it to break your heart. Carl Jung, who studied many Eastern traditions, he would say, can you for once in your life have the grace and the courage to kiss the dragons within you? Only then will they transform into a prince or princess. So the main work in Islamic spirituality is really to embrace your difficult feelings with compassion for yourself and bring it into you so you create what is called inner spaciousness. This is the crux of what is Sufi spirituality. To create an inner spaciousness. The verse in the Quran is about the results of it. The Quran says, and God spread out the earth as a carpet for you, so you may walk therein on spacious paths. So we have to do some spiritual practice if we want to deal with today's difficulties. We must create that inner spaciousness, as the Christians would say, to bring everybody at the table. What about outer work? Each one of us has to, for me as a Muslim, I have listened very closely to that verse in the Quran which I mentioned. God created diversity so you might get to know one another. But I have to get to know someone who is different from me. It's not just about you getting to know a Muslim, but someone who is different from you in color, in race, in sexual orientation, in maybe knowing a Republican, for example, or a Democrat. It is essential to get to know the other. I make it part of my ministry, not just to sing to the choir, to really reach out to those who are very different. So I have, for example, some people I work with for years now, those who are very, very fundamentalist, meaning conservative of the conservative. And I really mean that, very conservative. But you see, the way I have to approach this if I read the Quran is I've got to get to know the other person on a heart level. Number one. And number two, without any agenda, the most difficult thing. On a heart level, to really get to know the person. Number two, without any agenda. And trust me, it is slow, but it works wonderfully well. We haven't resolved any theological disputations. But you know what we have resolved is several things. One is the same disputations are there, but now they no longer loom as a threat because there's ample space for friendship, because we have gotten to know one another. And the second thing is I'm finding I'm changing. I realize that I myself have had such biased, stereotype understanding of those neoconservatives. There is so much sweetness in them, so much of community, so much of willingness to work with the poor, help the marginalized. So in fact, in Seattle, for example, we do a lot of work with very conservative Christians and Jews in building homes for the poor. In fact, right now we're involved in building a home for a Muslim family. And they're very eager to be of help. The third thing which is important for me is I'm aware that most Christians and Jews are very unaware of verses of the Quran. You don't know that the Quran has given birth to an astonishing number of sages and mystics in the world called Sufis. Some would say the largest number of saints and mystics. That becomes an ego comparison. So what is it about the Quran that has given birth to so many wise people? Among them, for example, Rumi. Rumi, when he used to utter a poem, he used to say always, I'm a slave of the Quran. I am dust on the path of Muhammad. So I make it my business now to talk to writers, talk to therapists. I have a big project going with the clergy people to tell them about Quranic verses and for them to use it in their writings, in their therapy. And I have a program now starting next year where I have many, many friends in the Christian churches. They'll all put certain selected verses in each of their pews. So along with their books, their hymnal books, they'll have 10 verses from the Quran to look at every time they go to church. Because the lack of awareness about Quranic verses is epidemic. And they have no idea. Verses like, every so where you turn is the face of Allah. It's a verse from the Quran, which inspired Rumi to say, if a drop of the wine of vision could rinse your eyes, everywhere you looked, you would weep with wonder. Okay, I could go on and on, but I really would like now some questions from you, and hard questions.
You used the word naf.
Yes.
Tell us more about the transformation of naf.
Terrific.
What's the root of naf? What is that word?
Okay. So the question was, what is nafs? How does nafs appear in the Quran? What is it about? Let me backtrack and tell you another verse, a direct verse from God to humanity. God says, I was a secret treasure, and I longed to be known. And so I created the worlds, visible and invisible. And the Quran says, oh humanity, I've created you upon the most beautiful model. But I've also put in you the nafs. You know, I think the closest is in the Hebrew nefesh. Has many aspects of meaning. The most simplified way is, it is the voice of the slinking whisperer of the Pharaoh within you, which continues to tells me, I am your Lord. So just to amplify that, a little bit more background. The Quran says, before humanity came down to earth, God gathered all of unborn humanity and said to it, am I not your Lord? And humanity was so excited to hear God's voice. We all uttered, yes, 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 yes. We testify it. Then the Quran says, we've also placed within you and outside of you a Pharaoh. The word is Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh says, I am your Lord. So there's this constant tension. And that's a part of the nafs within us. So there is this ego within us which the Qur'an says, literally says, sometimes inclines you towards wrongdoing. And you have to use compassion, you have got to use vigilance to transform that. The second stage of nafs is called a self-blaming nafs. We begin to realize as you use compassion and awareness, I have choices. And choices have consequences. And I can get help. I can surrender. Prophet Muhammad said, take one step towards God, God takes 7 steps towards you. Walk towards God, God comes running. So that's the second stage. And the third stage is a nafs at peace. When you've mastered the second one, then you can say, yes, I am practicing Islam. My nafs is at peace right now. You can never destroy your ego. You can only transform your nafs so it becomes opened up to a higher will. Like, for example, the mystics say, what is a little seed? That is seediness, when spring comes, should not be annihilated for the sake of a tree. So from the nafs grows this huge tree also. Any other questions? Yes?
I'm going to ask a hard question.
Please do, I want you to.
I enjoy studying religions, and I made the acquaintance last year of a Muslim who came to speak at the Atlanta Lodge. And he's a Wahhabi.
Oh boy, yeah.
From my reading since then, I've read the biography of the Prophet Muhammad.
Yes.
And a number of other books, including many by Ibn Warwick, the author who wrote a book called Why I'm Not a Muslim.
Right. Oh, yes, yes, yeah, yes.
Their version of Islam.
Okay, so let me break it into several parts. The first part my brother asked was, well, the first part you asked was about the Wahhabi tradition. How does that figure in Islam? Number 2, how does Sufism figure into Islam? And number 3, are Wahhabis and fundamentalists at the core of what is practiced in the Islamic countries today? Did I say it okay?
Yes.
Okay. You've heard of Saudi Arabia, of course, because it's an ally of the US. Now, when King Saud was coming into power many years ago, this is when the monarchy was starting in Saudi Arabia, they needed help. And they allied themselves with this reformer named Abdul Wahhab, who believed that Islam has declined after this 1,000 years of glory because it became too soft, because of these damn Sufis, and because we're not interpreting the Quran in a pure way. So they became the literalists of Islam. And it really was not too much of a problem because it's a very small group. In Saudi Arabia was a remote country in those days. But Saudi Arabia began to gain petrodollars and became awash in billions and billions of money, dollars. And suddenly these Wahhabis, who were a very small group, they attained astonishing power. And the deal between the Wahhabis and the Saudi government was, you don't disturb us, we don't disturb you. So what is the Wahhabis' demands? We want to build mosques all over the world, including the USA. So many of the mosques in the USA are built with Wahhabi money. And that's a very literalist interpretation of Islam. But don't forget, it's a very small minority. Why do they have power? 2 reasons. One is all the money they have. But number 2, I should tell you frankly, they plus the other school you mentioned, the Deobandi school, the other conservative people, they have very cleverly allied themselves with the common grievance, political grievance of the average Muslim. Corruption in the government, nobody cares about the poor Palestinians, nobody cares about them. These are all issues very dear to the average Muslim. And these literalists have said this is also our cause. As far as the mainstream of Islam and Sufism, what is forgotten is the history of Sufism. Sufis have always been in the mainstream of Islam. I mentioned the Largest number of Muslims are in South Asia. All Indian academicians agree that Islam spread in India mostly through the work of Sufis, 90%. Southeast Asia, 95%. Eastern Europe, even more than that. It's only since the decline of the political economic base of Islam that Sufis to the Saudi Arabians, who happen to have economic power right now, are a very dangerous breed. But if you go to Indonesia, the largest Muslim country, go to India, go to Pakistan, go to Bangladesh, every week there's a huge celebration of some Sufi saint called Urs. Urs means wedding with the beloved. Are most Muslims extremists? Absolutely not. You see, I should tell you, in Islam, there is no organized priesthood. Very hard concept for non-Muslims to understand. In the Sunni tradition particularly. In the Shia tradition, you've heard of Ayatollah, right? They also believe there is no ordained priesthood, but in the last 100 years, they have a more of a Christian hierarchical system of Ayatollah. Follow the Ayatollah. But in the bulk of the Muslim world, everybody is an imam. Everybody is a sheikh. Everybody is a maulana. Prophet Muhammad said, every Muslim is his or her own preacher. So for example, if you ask 9/11, where are those clerics from Islam? Well, in Islam, everybody is a cleric. The one who shouts the loudest and craziest is the one who gets heard. Is the one who gets heard. I want to tell you something, because I talk about this all the time. At some university, for example, just 2 weeks ago, someone said, well, wait a minute, Islam is different because the Qur'an says this. These verses are used to justify violence and this and that. Someone from the crowd, before even I spoke, got up. She was African American. She was so furious. She said, wait a minute, do you know that for centuries, verses of the Bible have been used to justify slavery? Do you know, for example, she said that when apartheid was happening in South Africa, in so many churches, apartheid was justified through verses of the Bible. Are we to judge Christianity from what was happening in those instances, in those times? It would be wrong to do that. It really would be wrong to do that. Today, if you judge Islam by the actions of a few people who are disabusing Quranic verses, you're really doing a disservice to Islam. You're even causing a greater hardening of the hearts, because the average suspicion by the average Muslim is that Islam is under attack. The average Muslim believes that Islam is under attack by the West. Just as you have fear of Muslims, believe me, Muslims have a lot of fear of you. A deep-seated fear of you also, because of your actions in the past. So we have to break this impasse. We have to get to know the other. It has to be on a personal basis. We cannot rely on governments. We cannot rely on authorities. And this is the beautiful aspect of what's happening. People at the grassroots level are really reaching out. It gives me a lot of hope, a lot of hope. I'm actually of the opinion that says that faith is the bird which sings in the dark, knowing that dawn is coming. I really feel dawn is coming. Why? Because of people like you and me doing the work.